Welcome everyone. It's a pleasure to welcome tonight here Claire Hanna MP for South Belfast. And the EU we often think of as a peace project in the aftermath of World War II. But one of the other peace projects that it has contributed to is the peace project in Ireland. And I can remember I grew up there myself, and I can remember I just saw this week even a reminder of what it used to be like, a tweet from a book called Children of the Troubles. And every so often some people tweet pages out of that, and it just reminded me of one 10-year-old girl who was killed. Her anniversary came up about a week ago, and I just remembered I was there, and it happened outside my school. And even 40 years later, it's still upsetting. And going back to when I go back, one of the lovely things about going back is that my nephews and nieces don't know anything now of what it was like, and that's thanks to the changes that came around after the Good Friday Agreement. So I let Claire talk more about that. And one of the silver linings, the few silver linings of the 2019 general election, was the election of representatives, including Claire, that remind people on this side of the pond that there's more than just the DUP that speaks for people in Northern Ireland. So with that, I'll hand over to Claire and let her do the rest of the talking for at least a little while. And then once she's finished, it will go over to questions. And the place to write your questions is in the chat window, and we have a couple of people moderating the questions who will read them out. Okay, and with that, I'll hand over to Claire. Thank you very much.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Claire. And I will, I must say, I'm sure everybody's zoomed out, so I'll try and not overload you at the start, because I think it would be much better to just converse. But as Claire said, I mean, we actually there's no point in reinventing the wheel. And actually, if you go back and read the Good Friday Agreement, it's easy to see how much it borrows from the Treaty of Rome in terms of the language about new beginnings and you know, unity and diversity and concepts that I suppose attract us all to the European project. And John Hume said that for many years, that the European Union was the greatest example of a peace building project. He spoke, John Hume, sorry, the founder of the SDLP and Nobel Prize winner and architect of the Good Friday Agreement, and he spoke endlessly in what we gently called his single transferable speech about his feelings standing on the bridge at Strasbourg and thinking back to, in his, you know, in living memory, the enmity between France and Germany and Britain and other key players, and how much was possible. And I suppose he always held it up as an example for Northern Ireland, both in terms of you know, managing the fact that you know, it's about relationships. You don't have to give any of yourself away in order to compromise in the common interest, and that, as well as the fact that he always saw the value that Europe could have for Northern Ireland in terms of economic development, and he said many times as well that the best peace process is a job. So I'm sure to this group, I don't have to extol the benefits of the European project and the tragedy of what we lose by Brexit in terms of obviously, I suppose, at the level people are experiencing now, disruption to trade, and particularly to small businesses who are you know, overwhelmed by the level of administration. And I am old enough to remember when Brexit was supposed to be about ending red tape. Also to the loss of free movement that British citizens experience. It's a slight difference here in that everybody in Northern Ireland is entitled to Irish citizenship and the freedom of movement that conveys. But you know, we just extend deep solidarity to those who have had this, crucial privilege and conference of European citizenship taken away from them. You'll understand then that in Northern Ireland, it was all of those losses plus the added complexity of the border, and we'll get on to that particular conundrum. It's like the worst ever fox and grain and chicken puzzle you can possibly imagine in terms of the things that have to be considered. But most acutely, it was just the imbalance that Brexit and the last 4.5 years have caused to the delicate equilibrium in Northern Ireland, because post the Good Friday Agreement, everybody had enjoyed really, being a master and mistress of their own destiny in terms of their identity. People could be, as the Good Friday Agreement allowed, British or Irish or both as they so choose. And in fact, many people were increasingly feeling Northern Irish, feeling elements of Britishness, feeling elements of Irishness, and not having to choose. And you could freely move and identify and trade north and south and east and west, and it wasn't really an issue. And the Good Friday Agreement was about just not disappearing. It didn't put away people's aspirations, but about not having to talk about the things that divide us, about sovereignty and borders and identity, and whether you look to London and whether you look to Dublin, they were just secondary. The whole point was that there was a rational way to deal with those issues and a framework, and we could get on with the everyday issues. Now, there's no doubt that there's a lot of politicians and political parties who don't want to get on with the everyday issues, who like scratching the old wound and have found ways to do so over the last 20 years. But Brexit, acutely exacerbated those issues. It meant that instead of not really talking about them, that's all we talked about from early 2016, morning and noon and night in the media before the referendum. And I think, as in Britain, the result took everybody by surprise. I know, as a kind of an avowed Europhile, that I did campaign extensively on it, and in fact the SDLP were the only party to register as campaigners, just as a party that was fundamentally pro-EU in our DNA. But there was the same levels of apathy as you probably met on the streets and in doorsteps yourselves, despite the complexity that leaving would have brought, and that was exacerbated by the usual suspects, and I do primarily mean the DUP dismissing concerns about the border and just dismissing concerns about the binary nature of kind of having to choose in one of those directions. And I think the tension that it put on political relationships is part of the reason why the Assembly collapsed in 2017. The political parties were just pulling in such opposite directions. That plus the pressure applied by the Confidence and Supply Agreement and the position that the DUP enjoyed in Westminster. But we entered this bizarre couple of years where people around Europe were talking about the Good Friday Agreement and talking about it in really good faith, but the institutions that it was supposed to found in terms of, the Assembly and the North-South bodies and East-West mechanisms were lying dormant. So that was a kind of you think back to it, was like that painting the Scream. People in Northern Ireland felt completely trapped. We were misrepresented by the DUP and we were unrepresented by Sinn Féin MPs. So this kind of debate, this crucial debate, was going on in Westminster, and whatever about the kind of solidarity that we had from continuing EU members, it was always very clear to me that the decision would ultimately be made by the 650 MPs. It was they who had, Brussels had the power to kind of shape the debate, but it was always going to be MPs who decided the shape of the Brexit. So that's why it was a kind of an historic, when we look back on it, tragedy that in those crucial years, Northern Ireland really only sent one MP who was willing to kind of represent the mainstream of political opinion, and that was Lady Sylvia Herman, who valiantly tried to put forward. She was a moderate independent unionist, but who tried to put forward that voice of those in Northern Ireland who had voted to remain, but just generally to sound the alarm about the disequilibrium. And I know from the outside, I was back and forth. Obviously, the SDLP had no MPs in that period, but was back and forth trying to engage with groups. And it was very clear that there were many MPs from all parties who were very keen to find something to rally around, who were seeking solutions, and I suppose in many cases seeking cover to vote for and to support a softer form of Brexit. And I regret that kind of loud and leery voices from Northern Ireland again, imply that there was never going to be any problem. So fast forward then onto to October 2019, and kind of out of nowhere, the protocol came, and I'm sure we'll discuss maybe the detail of that. You'll probably be aware of the concept of the backstop, which it offered more than the protocol, particularly because it would have allowed for a kind of a softer UK-wide optioning. So the protocol wasn't really a way that we had thought about it or framed it. Businesses here were clear that it didn't offer the same level of smoothness of the protocol. And it's fair to say the business community here did a lot of heavy lifting over the last 4 years in trying to, explain the details to people. But the protocol, it is worth saying, wasn't supported by any party in Northern Ireland. I think technically Sinn Féin, who had MEPs, voted for it, but it was opposed by our party and by the Alliance and by the DUP and the UUP. But it's what we've got. And again, the December 2019 general election. I should be used to this in Parliament, when you're kind of talk, it's good practice, but I'm not filtering out that voice very well. But the December 2019 election, and with the very large majority that Johnson got, unfortunately, it became our reality. And as you'll all know, and I'm imagining you were all campaigners, our possibilities and our hopes of a different outcome and a second referendum fell at that time. So certainly, as pragmatists, we in the SDLP acknowledge that the protocol was the settled will of the UK Parliament. It had always been the case that there were three options. You could have no Brexit or a soft Brexit, or you could have a border on the island of Ireland, which is politically, but also completely practically impossible, or you could have this barrier down the Irish Sea. We have been very clear as just genuine adherents to the European cause and to the principles of the Good Friday Agreement that no barrier was going to be an easy sell, and any barrier either down the Irish Sea or across the island was going to do damage to relationships here. But it was the least worst option once the DUP and the Conservative Party had taken all of the other options off the table. So it's, like all good compromises, nobody's happy a little bit, and it has been very, very contentious. But we are in this sort of weird situation where those of us, the SDLP and the Alliance and Sinn Féin, who opposed Brexit, and the first two who fought it quite extensively, are now kind of trying to get on with things and trying to manage Brexit and the outworkings, whereas the DUP, who campaigned with all their hearts and souls and took all the other options off the table, are now decrying it and are having a strategy of creating as much disruption as possible. But from my perspective, a message that I've been trying to communicate is that we have been handed lemons, but we're going to try and make lemonade. And there are some advantages to Northern Ireland because we are at the crossroads of the GB market and the EU market. Now, I say that in the full knowledge that is at the detriment to businesses, including small businesses in Britain. Welsh lamb farmers and Somerset cheddar and Scottish langoustines and producers who are now facing challenges selling into the single market. But with the cards we've been dealt, we're trying to make the case that food producers here can access that market freely, and there are opportunities in things like advanced manufacturing. So that's what we've been trying to say. You know, we've kind of, this is the hand we've been dealt in Northern Ireland, all of us, and we better try and make it work. So that's kind of the story so far of the impact of Brexit, you know, on relationships in Northern Ireland, on the Good Friday Agreement, and on the economy. But I'm aware I've been going on for quite a bit. So will I take some questions if that's okay? I don't know. Do you want me to just pull them out, or what way works best for you?
I think you can feel free to pull out any that you think you want to answer, Claire. And in addition, if there's a lag, we'll fish out ones for you to answer as well.
Okay, brilliant. Yeah, the first one there, and I see it's come from a couple of people about, yeah, I mean, it says here, what did you think of the Irish Times headlines that the DUP declare guerrilla warfare on the Northern Ireland Protocol? I think it's really problematic. I think, you know, as we know, probably everybody knows, but as we know acutely in Northern Ireland, words have consequences, and using kind of violent rhetoric in the situation that we have that is delicate is incendiary, particularly in the context of you know, there was, you know, death threats to Micheál Martin, there was alleged death threats to customs workers, although that was a little bit confected. It's really important to say that unionism, and even very moderate unionism, is really discombobulated by this, and I completely understand where that is coming from, because borders are symbolic. It isn't just trade, and I suppose it is a shock to people who maybe, you know, get a parcel and it's got a customs tag on it or whatever, and I don't diminish that in any way, and as I say, I cautioned for years, you know, that this would be the outcome. There would be an east-west barrier, and I spoke about it, you know, at length on many occasions, including in Parliament. But what is happening is that you know, legitimate kind of concern and disruption, and I suppose just feelings maybe of abandonment, have been totally exploited by the DUP, who, as I say, are just desperately trying to push back responsibility for what has happened, because obviously on their watch, while they held the UK government in the palm of their hands, this has happened, and people like me begged them, literally, like in TV studios and in different debates, said, please see the writing on the wall, please see where this is going. So there has been an attempt to, I suppose, spin it that basically the EU and nationalism have done this to you. You know, they've put a border up just out of meanness to punish the UK. And I suppose just no acknowledgement of the realities of trade, and the fact that if the UK went for the very extreme Brexit that the DUP supported and cheerleaded, the border would have to go somewhere. You know, these are the kind of basics and fundamentals of the Brexit debate. So anyway, it's really dangerous language. As I say, we've had a lot of it over the last 7 or 8 weeks in the radio. You know, we must fight. We will fight through political and constitutional means, but if we need to do other, we will do that. Just kind of language of confrontation. And, you know, somewhere where over 3,000 people died, you know, through guerrilla warfare, it's just a wildly inappropriate thing to say. And it wasn't, you know, casually tweeted out by some newbie. You know, this is by Sammy Wilson MP, who's a veteran, who's been around and who knows, a veteran of Northern Ireland politics, nothing else, by the way, but who's been around and knows exactly what he's doing. But as I say, it is worrying because it's so lacking in strategy. And I think there was a difficult few weeks at the start where the UK government, particularly I have to say in the form of Boris Johnson, was kind of humouring it a little bit, and saying, oh yeah, well look, maybe we'll trigger Article 16, and pretending, I suppose, that there wasn't a border in the Irish Sea. But I think there is. And then, of course, and we maybe come on to this, a fundamentally terrible mistake by the EU Commission to nearly trigger Article 16, and I'll come back to that, I'm sure, at some point. But as I say, this is without strategy. This is an international treaty. This, you know, the protocol, the withdrawal agreement, they are the result of 4.5 years of discussing this issue. We tried and explored and tested out and chatted out all of the other possibilities, and this is what London and Brussels have arrived at. So it's not going to be thrown in the bin right away. And I suppose the Ulster Unionist Party, a more modern party, and a party, by the way, who had the foresight to see the problems of Brexit and campaigned in the main for Remain, I've tried to moderate it slightly, but the DUP strategy is the protocol must go. They're not even engaging on any efforts to mitigate the damage or to reduce the friction. And it's very clear that neither the EU or the UK have an appetite to do that, because frankly, they've both kind of got bigger fish to fry. And I suppose the attention span of the rest of Europe has kind of moved on. You know, you're sitting in Finland going, what? So somebody has to have their sandwiches checked on a shipping container. That's not the end of the world, and I'm not going to reopen this whole nightmare. So yeah, dangerous language from a party that are running around like headless chickens, and it's genuinely worrying, because, as I say, people's legitimate concerns and grievances are being exacerbated and manipulated, and people are being misled that there are alternatives out there.
Perhaps that leads on to another question that a couple of people have asked. What are the prospects of it being accepted or rejected in 2024 by the Northern Ireland Assembly? Yeah, given what's going on at present, yeah.
Sure. So yes, there's a kind of a retrospective endorsement written into the deal, which is kind of weird the way that it is retrospective. People will have heard, and it's kind of misuse of the principle of consent in the Good Friday Agreement, which, just to explain it briefly, it's based on the fundamental principle that Northern Ireland remains part of the United Kingdom until a majority of people in Northern Ireland say otherwise. And it's there as something that in the main in 1998 had to be acknowledged by Sinn Féin, who up until that point had a strategy that we can, blow the Brits away, basically, that we can through bombing and killing can force Britain to withdraw, which always fundamentally ignored the fact that 1 million people here are British and perfectly entitled to be British. So that's where the principle of consent came, and then it refers to the constitutional status of Northern Ireland. Now, when Brexit happened, I was one of the, whatever you call it, the kind of petitioners, tested that legally, that we said that Brexit would upset the constitutional arrangement of Northern Ireland, that leaving the EU was something that would be affected by the principle of consent. We lost that argument. I still think it had merit. I mean, actually, there's very little explicit about membership of the EU in the Good Friday Agreement, quite simply because it was unthinkable that we wouldn't be. It was kind of assumed that, like, the air around us, it was going to be there, and it wasn't going anywhere, because it was, lunacy that we wouldn't be in it. And it refers, the Good Friday Agreement and the political declaration that attached to it refers a lot to common EU membership and that being the framework, but there's nothing in there that explicitly says leaving the EU would breach the agreement. So anyway, we lost that argument, and I'm losing slightly the thread of what you asked me there, which was, it's been a long day. It was about, So anyway, yes, so it has to be voted on in the Assembly in 2024. There's very little chance that it will be opposed, because in the main, the SDLP, the Alliance Party, Sinn Féin, and the Green Party, and a couple of smaller representatives, the People for Profit, support it on the basis that there's no alternative. I think unionism who oppose it, and that is there is a democratic legitimacy problem there if all political representatives of unionism oppose it. That is, I understand why that's problematic, but I think they number like 42 or 43 of the 90 MLAs, and that is likely to slip further. We've got a scheduled election next year, and just the direction of travel is that unionism isn't in a majority now, because actually we have unionism and nationalism, which you'll be familiar with, but there's an increasing number of people here who don't wish to define as either. And I say that as somebody who is politically identified and is a member of a nationalist party, but nationalism isn't a political label I'm particularly comfortable with. I aspire to Irish unity, and I'm an Irish person, but I don't want it to define me or to dominate or decide all of my politics. And I think there's a growing number of people, and it's clear that in the election since in 2019, for example, political unionism experienced quite a bit of slippage. So it's unlikely that it will be rejected. It's problematic in a way that it's there because So say like you're an investor who does want to come to Northern Ireland, and we're saying, so do your 5-year plan, but by the way, in 3 years, we might be tearing up this trading framework. So it's difficult in that way. And bear in mind, at the time that it was signed, the Assembly wasn't even sitting. So we were like, so you've written this in that the Assembly rubber stamps this, and there is no Assembly. So so it unless something really dramatic happens, it's going to pass in the absence of alternatives, because everybody knows that if the protocol goes, there isn't another option except a land border. And I might come to why that's, because I think people sort of think of it as an either or. Well, why did you choose a sea border to punish this side and a land border? But I think just a brief point on why, never mind the political ramifications, how just literally impossible a land border would be. And that is because it's 500 kilometers weaving through, as you'll know, countryside, farms, schools, homes, churches. It just simply couldn't happen that you would have, certain sorts of environmental regulations in one field and the same farmer has different regulations in the other. And just the fact that the smuggling would go through the roof and everything else. So there's just lots and lots of practical reasons why it couldn't happen on the island. And business were very clear, say like somebody used the example of Bailey's. People enjoy a tipple at Christmas, the dairy products in Bailey's might cross the border 10 times before they reach the bottle, in terms of being collected from different farms and bought to processing plants and all that. And similarly, lots of animal products and produce, are just like the gory details of meat, but farms, sausages, all that kind of stuff. It's collected from different places. So I have veered away from whatever the question was, but yeah.
Okay, I think you did. Michael and Mary, I'll leave it up to you to feed in some more questions again from the chat.
Shall I feed something in, Keir? It's actually the most recent question we've had in, and we'll try and make sure that some of the people who asked questions earlier don't get left out. But just because I think this is relevant to thinking about 2024, so Jane Phillips has asked the very straight question: when will there be a united Ireland? So I guess that sort of opens the question that
sure.
Could a border poll be what changes the 2024 situation?
Sure. So the short answer is when a majority in Northern Ireland wish it to change. And I put my cards on the table and have never pretended otherwise. I think that is, a desirable outcome. And if I could wave a magic wand, that's where I would get to. However, I am fundamentally a realist, and my primary political divider is the Good Friday Agreement. And again, John Hume, who always said, it's not the territory that's divided, it's the people. And Brexit hasn't actually united the people. And I suppose we have also just seen what happens when you put a massive question to the electorate with very little detail about what it means, as in Brexit. So we've seen what happens when you try to do constitutional change on that level. So there's a lot of work to be done, but fundamentally, and as I say, it's something that if you'd asked me 5 years ago, I'd have gone, yeah, it's a good idea, and maybe my kids will see it in their lifetime. And I am much more progressively and actively trying to realize that, because it does address a lot of problems. And I say, as a social democrat, the fundamental thing for me is to get, no disrespect to any or in this, to get the hands of the Conservative Party off my life at the moment, because they have showed a fundamental misunderstanding and caused very great damage, particularly the section of that party in the ascendancy. But and this is the centenary of partition. In Northern Ireland State was formed in 1921, and it was formed by essentially trapping a minority of nationalists in a constitutional situation they were very unhappy with. And if we did a quick border poll, slipped it through while everybody's in a bit of a tizzy and got 51-52%, we're just reversing partition. We're just trapping another minority in a constitutional arrangement they don't want to be in. And again, I know I talk about John Hume a lot, and I'm writing something today, so that's why. But he famously said to the British Army and McGilligan Strand, you govern us, but you don't have our consent. And consent is so crucial. So to basically, if you just pass the threshold to get the United Ireland, then, but you, as I say, you have, nearly 1 million people who are like, this isn't what I wanted. So yes, that's the letter of the law. And if that's what we get, then that's how we start, that's how we build the new Ireland. But a modern, progressive, inclusive state is not built by slipping a majority through. So that's something that I think it is many people, so that's the negative bit, but there is no doubt that it is a conversation that is fundamentally alive in people's minds, as I say, as a way to just get away from the kind of, no disrespect, but the total mess of GB politics at the moment. And just because, you know, there's a lot of, that's a push factor, but there's pull factors as well. If you look, the Republic has, you know, gone through a period of major social change over the last decade in terms of things like the equal marriage and the abortion referendums, and some, you know, moving on from sort of institutional abuse reports and so on. Plus, it is a more dynamic economy. There's just more and better decent jobs. So a lot of people see a life and a lifestyle available in the Republic that isn't in Northern Ireland, which is kind of held back by lots of structural failings. I mean, we're at somebody said at the top of all the charts you don't want to be on, you know, all the inequality charts, and we're at the bottom of all the good charts about economic performances. And certainly the SDLP, we just have a bigger ambition for it than that. And I think that being part of a dynamic new island economy could advantage that. So it's a very real prospect. People are thinking about it and talking about it, but we can't ignore that fundamental point that it would at this time risk trapping hundreds of thousands of people who don't feel that the modern Irish state reflects them. Now, there's a lot of work being done in the South, for example, to try and, you know, show people of a unionist or a Protestant background that it's a state for them as well. And the Irish government have established a shared island unit, which is trying to kind of look at practical projects. But, you know, if somebody says, it's a bit like when you're doing a jigsaw, which if you're like me, you're doing more than you ever have done in lockdown. But, you know, you put the frame in place and you kind of create the picture. And then the border poll to me is kind of one of the last bits. You put it in place when you kind of know what it looks like, you know what it means for people's pension, you know what the health service is going to look like, you know, all of those things, you know how you're going to manage the relationship with Britain, because we're always going to be next door neighbours, you know, even in the new Ireland, we're still Britain. Hundreds of thousands of Irish people are going to live in Britain, and hundreds of thousands of British people are going to live in Ireland, and we're always going to be each other's biggest trading partners. So all of those things have to be addressed. But, you know, I don't hide the fact that I think soon, and I hope soon, but I don't see a border poll until maybe the end of this decade, and who knows whether it will be successful. But when you win, you want to win big.
There's another question that has come in, which sort of follows on somewhere from your last answer, and this is from a Michael Jankowski, and it's a question that bothers us over here. I have to say, those of us who are activists for rejoining the European Union. I suspect most of us on this event might be sympathetic to that. Anyway, the question is, are you getting any support from the Keir Starmer's Labour Party on the issues you have mentioned? And we're all wondering over here, where Keir Starmer, where is he going to go on the Brexit issue?
So looking at politics from where you guys are, I can see where the Labour strategy comes from, right? Because you're 4 years out from the next election and people are bored with it. And that's how Johnson slipped this through. People just believe they'll get it done, even though, and I think Labour probably could have been stronger in saying, Brexit will never be done. This will be a perpetual negotiation. Our relationship with the EU will be constantly redefined and so on. So I get how people are like, oh my God, please don't talk about that anymore. I'm so over it. But I also can completely understand the frustration of those who kind of know that it solves a lot of the problems. So I'll just be really honest. I'm not consuming enough kind of GB media to know exactly the priority level that's being given. And I do hear, you know, I've just been just took part in a debate in Parliament on the arts, as it happens. But you know, I heard a number of Labour MPs, for example, articulating the real challenges of the loss of freedom of movement. And so I think MPs are probably within their own kind of, you know, disciplines or briefs or whatever, highlighting the challenges of Brexit. But I kind of get why why, even as just, as I say, a dyed-in-the-wool Europhile, why starting to talk now about rejoin, you kind of look like the crazy old lad in the pub who's like, oh yeah, he's always, you know, kind of that it seems so far away. And so we kind of basically sound like the Bill Cashes did in the 70s. We're like, yeah, dead on. We just had a referendum on that. So I understand. And I would be, if I was a member of the Labour Party, I would be the person at the meeting stomping the table and asking for movement on it. But I can understand why this far out from the election, when the Tories trade in culture war primarily, and they want to say, and in fact, I know the times all blended into each other, because nearly the whole time I've been an MP has been in COVID, so the two issues have overlapped. But you know, they were desperate for that first year to talk, you know, when before the deal was signed, about these obsessive Remainers and stuff, and caricaturing you know, Labour as the pro-EU party that we all wanted them to be, and that they weren't fulsomely. So I kind of get it, but I suppose it has to be about focusing on the kind of specific issues that it's causing for people to build it back up. Now, kind of out of nowhere, what's happened here, the conversation in the last 2 or 3 weeks, as I say, after the DUP said no to a soft Brexit, no to any sort of alignment, the chat is a little bit about a Swiss-style deal, which is basically alignment on veterinary and SPS, which is, you know, a soft Brexit essentially, and we hear through the grapevine that George Eustace, the Environment Secretary, is considering it, because basically now that they've kind of got their big we got it done thing, I think the London or Whitehall are seeing a lot of the problems that, you know, in things like fisheries that could be addressed by this. So now that kind of people aren't paying attention, they'll probably go back to it. And we and you and the Labour Party should enjoy a well-deserved "we told you so" moment whenever that happened. But I guess the strategy is to do it piece by piece, and not being so fully absorbed in that atmosphere. You know, I can't say how well that's working.
Can I pick up on that last point? And this sort of summarises several questions we've had, I think, including some from before your talk, which we have via email. And that's just, you talked there about the possibility for a Swiss-style deal. So people are asking about what possibilities are there for small incremental improvements to the protocol? Are there ways that its implementation by the British government, by the EU, could be improved? And maybe I can just throw in a little coda, which is from me actually on that, which was, do you think that David Frost's appointment replacing Michael Gove makes that a more unlikely or a more likely prospect?
So yeah, taking those. So the Frost thing, I'll be honest, I never thought I'd say it because I'm not a big Michael Gove fan, but I don't know that that's been a great development, because, you know, it is, I mean, bear in mind, you know, Frost signed the thing, so he has to sign over the protocol, but you know, the way they can sort of think two completely incompatible things at the same time. And I suppose from the EU side, a little bit, you'll know what you're getting slightly more with Frost, whereas with Gove, it was all on the one hand this and the other hand that. You kind of probably come out of the meeting not really knowing what had been agreed. But I just see in the chat there, somebody had posted the fundamental point that poll after poll and kind of just the feedback get is that people want those high standards. And the ironic point running through all of this, and something that I tried to make in Parliament many times in 2020, is the UK government keep telling us that they don't want to drop standards on agriculture, on food, on workers' rights or whatever. So actually they're doing all this to have the theoretical power to diverge, which they say they won't use. And I would say to kind of the DUP, that's how much they value. That's how much they value. You know, they're going to do this to you, even though they say they're not going to use the power. Now, we can believe or not believe that they're not going to use the power and that they're not going to drop the standards, because, you know, they've rejected every opportunity to put it in law, and through the agriculture bill and through the trade bill and so on. We with Labour, to be fair to them, have and Labour, you know, worked hard on those things to put it to kind of put it on the front of the legislation that they weren't going to diverge, and the Tories whipped to oppose that. So I think that's maybe where the opportunities are, because the average person who voted for Brexit doesn't, as you know, isn't going, yay, let's use extra pesticides or whatever. It's not, you know, for a lot of people, it was a feeling, or it was a moment in time, or it was a kind of a promise sold, and nobody really thought that it was diverging from all of those things. So yes, there's the possibility. I was really surprised, because we had obviously said it for ages, but you know, never bit. So we were surprised when about 3 weeks ago, comment from George Eustace, might have been a response to a question, said, yes, we are exploring it. And you'll maybe have seen last week that the EU Commission have kind of put it formally. So there are opportunities, there are barriers, because obviously it would require, you know, some element of adjudication and jurisdiction, and, you know, but I just personally have a sense, and again, I will not pretend to be any expertise on kind of the politics of Britain, but I just get a sense that people aren't following it at that granular level, and that even the kind of ERG types, table thumping, that was me thumping the table by the way, aren't going to kick up too much, because they haven't kind of protested too much against the protocol, you know, apart from a few platitudes thrown to the DUP. So I reckon the UK could get away with some of these things without having total mutiny. That's where the hope lies, and I think that's you know, I guess where the Labour Party strategy is, and I can see the merit in that as a boring reformist social democrat, that basically you slowly and incrementally build back in. And I talked about, you know, building the jigsaw and doing the outside. You know, once you have things like the standards and the protections and the frameworks all there, then in years to come, and I don't know, like a border poll, whether it's 5 or 10 or 20, you put the question and people will go, yep, it would just make a lot more sense to go back in the same way as it's a perpetual question in Norway, and there's a strong lobby to go back in, and one of these days they'll have a referendum and they'll not go back in but go into the EU, and one of these days they will.
There's a question here, a more general question from Murray White. In England at the moment, well, the UK, if it does exist anymore, what's affected the headlines is the state of the fishing industry.
Oh yeah, I thought you were asking me about the channel. Yeah,
it's not a question, but that's just in the headlines over here at the moment. So the question from Murray White is, which sections of Northern Irish society is worst affected by Brexit, and why? And is there any chance of any remedies? So,
yeah, I mean, I suppose it's SMEs, right? Because if you look at, you know, it's nearly all possible, you know, in terms of the movement of goods and the trade and stuff, but it's really admin heavy. So if you're Asda or, you know, whatever big shop, big brand, you have the resources to have a logistician, to have a trade person, maybe even have your own vets on hand to do all those certifications. But if you are a small manufacturer of, you know, kind of artisan food or a delicatessen or something like that, those are the people that are having it really, really tight, and or even, excuse me, small scale traders on eBay or whatever who have to deal a lot in sending parcels and all that kind of stuff. Those are the people who are, I think, really disadvantaged. And that's not to, you know, wash away the challenges for as I say, bigger businesses in freight and haulage who have had to invest huge amounts in kind of making this work. But manufacturing NI, who ran a business survey, and actually fewer than one business in 5 said that they wanted the protocol gone, and over half said either they weren't disrupted or they were disrupted but they're over it now because of work they've been able to do. Bear in mind as well, in a lot of cases, we didn't even get the information until New Year's Eve or whatever, you know, a lot of the rules and regulations. So yes, I think there are kind of derogations and minimizations that could help around, you know, this kind of what is categorized as at risk. What do we think could plausibly enter the single market? You know, what might be brought over the border and put in a spar in Dundalk, or those types of things. There's an argument to say that, you know, you could definitely narrow that list, and similarly broadening out the trusted traders. And I think that's where the window of opportunity will be found. But, and again, I know those who like to say, oh, it's just the EU being stick in the mud. I say to people, it's a bit like going into Tesco and using the automatic checkout and trying to haggle on price. You know, these are rules here, you know, these are kind of rules of the club that the EU is based around. They're not just doing it, you know, out of meanness. And I think the EU line is, yes, let's try and maybe talk about trusted trader or whatever, but there needs to be trust and there needs to be data, and therefore there needs to be implementation of the protocol rules that are already there. So I think some of those softening and mitigations are possible around, as I say, kind of limiting the definition of at risk and around trusted trader, but they require to get the thing up and running first of all, and to demonstrate good faith and to demonstrate traceability and systems and stuff. Boring, piecemeal, hard yards work. And as I say, there are many who just want to talk about guerrilla warfare, or I see a question about the agriculture minister just stopping construction of the border post. That's not the way to do your business. Unfortunately, it is the kind of boring work of kind of speaking to business, seeing what's working for them, all that kind of stuff.
Can I ask a quick question? Actually, it's kind of a follow up on all that. If we just stay on the same thing very, very quickly. We've seen even in our part of the UK here in the east of England that there's a report on Look East and BBC Look East yesterday about the impact that Brexit's having on the local communities, and of course we've all seen about the shellfish exporters and problems there. Yeah. So one of the things is that I was going to ask you was, are politicians and also business organisations in Northern Ireland working with their counterparts in the rest of the UK to kind of make the case and to build alliances for changes, and maybe like you said about the SPS and veterinary regulations could actually benefit not just Northern Ireland but also the rest of the UK as well?
Yeah, so I suppose it's worth saying, obviously, and even when I was answering the question of the Labour Party, we work very closely with the Labour Party's, Northern Ireland Fund branch in particular, and there are, a decent team of MPs who really, and I have to say, it is thankless, I'm sure, to go, you've got the Northern Ireland brief, you have to get into the weeds of here, and there are MPs that I know just from their outfit are spending hours and hours per week, understanding these issues and advancing these issues and engaging, and I must say that is really, really very welcome. So yes, we're working at a political level, and for example, Louise Haig, the Shadow Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, would have a really good understanding of the different kind of mitigations that are possible. But yeah, I think the traders and the businesses, when I say traders, it's like I'm talking about your man or woman down in the stall, but I mean the kind of business networks, manufacturing and CBI and retail and so on. As I say, they really, really stepped into the void over the last few years when there was no assemblies, there was no one in Northern Ireland to give that coherent view, and there was only DUP MPs. A lot of 3 or 4 or 5 people in those representative bodies really, really boned up on this stuff and made themselves experts, and I think are kind of in fairly regular touch with their UK network. So yeah, as I say, freight, trade, manufacturing, institute of directors, there's clearly work going on, and I know those bodies at a UK level would have engagement events and are looking at it to the extent that the kind of Remainer in me says it is a way to soften it and soften the impact in Britain, and I think that's undoubtedly in the interests of businesses and as a progressive realization towards a better place that's on people's minds. But at the moment, I think it is just at the level of information exchange and understanding and kind of policy ideas rather than anything yet. But you'd imagine if you were particularly an issue affected by the SPS and veterinary, and you heard that they're thinking about Swiss style, you would like to think that those organisations would be banging the door down and trying to leverage that open.
Can I follow that up then with just a couple more, maybe finish up this sort of strand of thinking about some of the details around trading with a couple of other questions we've had. So one came from Patrick Thurud, actually ahead of the event. And Patrick was asking whether there'd been an increase in cross-border trade, so cross-border between the Republic and the North, since the beginning of this year and possibly last year too. And Patrick also asked, do retailers in Northern Ireland accept euros from shoppers from the Republic, and can the Assembly do anything to encourage the use of euros? And then maybe just one other sort of just, as I say, to wrap this up, from Robert Sprigg, who's noting that many exports from the Republic to the mainland EU are now bypassing the UK altogether, and is that having an effect on Northern Ireland?
Yeah, so I suppose overall, beyond anecdote, it's too soon to say, and obviously as well, a lot has been affected by COVID and the fact that we are still in lockdown. You're not technically allowed to cross the border because the Republic has a no travelling outside your county rule, for example. So we're flying a little bit blind. There is evidence from Dublin Port, gave evidence to Northern Ireland, submitted evidence to the Northern Ireland Affairs Committee that I sit on, that said they had really seen a reduction in volume there. And as you know, you probably know there's new ferry routes that essentially cut out the land bridge and cut out the island of Britain. So I think there really will be diversion of trade there. And the second thing about shoppers and shops, about that, I'm not completely sure about the euro. I mean, I suppose in these days and age, everybody's contactless and all that kind of stuff. And again, particularly in the COVID context, I always remember from being my mum's from just outside Newry, and I remember shops used to have the exchange rate in the window all the time, and would have taken both. And I'd say now that it's mostly digital money, I would say they do. But that's a really important point. Actually, I mean, there's borderism in the Brexit deal as well. There, as I say, there's this sense that kind of nationalists won, and we got the border in the Irish Sea, and like as if it was a kind of a pick a winner. I mean, the protocol is very narrow. It deals with goods. There are real issues around services and immigration and all sorts of things that that create frictions to north-south trade as well. So we will know, I suppose, once businesses start to report as they do, whether there's more trade north-south. I mean, you'll hear the numbers quoted all the time, particularly, it has to be said, by Brexiters, about how there's more volume of trade in monetary terms east-west than north-south. And there's no doubt about that. I think the macro figure is 10 billion between Britain and Northern Ireland and 4 billion between Ireland north and south. It's worth saying there's more movement of units north-south, and also there's the fact that 30,000 people, cross the border every day outside of COVID times, and would have to process through border infrastructure if we had a border in the island of Ireland. And it is also worth saying that we simultaneously were sold Brexit on the basis that look at all this fancy potential trade we can have elsewhere. So we have to then, by the same token, believe that trade flows aren't fixed in time. But I think some of it will be wait and see. And I think you would like to think that some, if there's frictions east-west, and again, I don't want any business, small or large, to have had to choose between their two markets, but you will probably find one of the business people said that trade is like water. It will find the path of least resistance. It will kind of find whatever is the easiest way for it to move. And once the framework and the criteria are set out, it will follow those flows, and there will be changes happening. And some of the regulations, like sausages, you've heard, there was a kind of a surreal few weeks when the things that we were talking about were pet passports, pot plants, eels, sausages. It was kind of, you turn on the radio going, what now? It was kind of all really tangential things. But the EU were saying, you need to find a new supplier for salt. We make sausages in elsewhere on the island of Ireland and stuff like that. So there is going to be a trade disruption. There's no doubt about it. Just, I see in the question, I just have to answer it because there's two questions about the Boris Tunnel and the Boris Borough and the Boris Bridge. As I kind of said about him, this guy couldn't build a bridge from London to London. So I don't have a great expectation that there's going to be one across yet. And it's something that is routinely like I say to my children, like, yeah, dead on, here's a chocolate biscuit or something just to distract them. And, it's not, I mean, I think that the feats of engineering that would be required to either build that bridge or this kind of 3-tunnel thing, I believe there are, kind of munition stores and all that kind of stuff. But I think the sums of money involved would make it prohibitive. And I mean, it's only just under an SDLP infrastructure minister are we getting a motorway between the two key cities in Northern Ireland. So if we had to come here, people would say, can we have that before we have a fantasy bridge? So I don't I mean, I'm genuinely for building and strengthening and enhancing and protecting our East-West, our British-Irish relationships, but no, I don't think that's a practical way. And the second was, so the TV programme Soft Border Patrol, yes, I thought it was very funny, and it was kind of a bit of levity in that very complex time, because as I say, you know, most people in Britain or Ireland didn't know their customs union from their single market, either before 2016 or after, but it kind of highlighted some of the absurdities of, for example, Lough Foyle, which is just in Derry, and if you can think of the map of Ireland, you know, it kind of bisects the EU and not the EU in terms of Ireland and Northern Ireland. They were talking about how they would be able to tell which fish were British and which were Irish and stuff, and it was quite a fun way to demonstrate how complex the issues were.
One question here. Well, I know we're coming to an end, but I think it would be useful to address it. It focuses on trade, but I think it's a wider question. The question is from Kevin Sean Rogers, and it's about the trade deal between Johnson and Biden. Will it help Northern Ireland and the Republic of Ireland? But I think there's a wider issue about the election of Biden. My family in Ireland are just gung-ho about Biden, and they're all looking forward to his visit. Apparently he has 8 grandparents, far more than JFK.
Yeah, he's a purebred.
But also the other point is that the United States was a very strong player in the Good Friday Agreement, and Trump and Johnson, I have to say, don't care about Northern Ireland, in my opinion. So I'm wondering what you think about the election of Biden. I mean, he will come to Ireland at some stage. Hopefully he will come to Northern Ireland as well. But I'm hoping his election would help add some strength, if you like, to the Good Friday Agreement.
Mm-hmm. It's worth saying, Biden, and I know whenever he was elected, there was a kind of a sort of sniffiness, particularly in, I suppose, the Brexit supporting, that he was some sort of, you know, lumpen nationalist that basically just wanted to kick the Brits or whatever. And he's not. He's somebody who has a real depth of understanding and pedigree as an internationalist generally. So I think would oppose Brexit on that basis. He's just somebody who believes in a rules-based order and multilateralism and all of the things that Britain has been rejecting in the Brexit years. And yes, you're right in saying he's somebody who's a sort of developed interest in Ireland. I think that was positive. I think it definitely shifted the dynamic, whether or not, I mean, I think it was kind of the jury was out, whether or not, you know, Johnson was going for a deal at that point in November whenever he was elected. But I do think if he was on the fence, and I think he was on the fence, but he realized that it wasn't going anywhere under Biden, and they had to kind of change the cut of their jib quite a lot, actually. And I think there is a different tone, because if the UK is saying, no, we don't want to go that way, we don't want to go to the EU, you know, you're kind of left looking at America, and you have to behave in a way that's acceptable to America. So yeah, I think it's a good thing. I think it changed the dynamic. I think he's somebody who's interested in the wider world in a way Trump quite simply wasn't. I mean, actually, you know, people say, well, Trump never did anything bad in Northern Ireland, and he didn't. Actually, I think a lot of us went, oh God, what's he going to do? But he just had absolutely no interest in it, for better or worse. And so he didn't make anything worse. But yeah, so I think there's opportunities there. I think, you know, fundamentally, I mean, he's probably, for better or worse, nearly as protectionist as Trump, and neither of them are going to be massively pro foreign direct investment going to Ireland. But I think Biden will take that responsibility, and I go back to that Hume line that the best peace process is a job, and economic development is the best way to kind of show the possibilities of Irish unity, or certainly to give, you know, young people hope and reason to stay and all that. And I think he'll be a friend in that regard. As regards to what happens in terms of a UK-US trade deal, I genuinely don't know, but like, they're not into it for the goodness of their hearts. So you know, I think they are going to want, under whichever president, they are going to want access to what the UK has, and I just don't think that is going to be good news either for, you know, health or agriculture. You know, leaving aside just the logic and gravity of geography, and kind of, you know, trading food with your nearest neighbours. You know, their standards just quite simply aren't on a par.
Do we have time for a couple more questions?
Yes, I'd one question that's come up a couple of times is, how do you think the project austerity will affect the Good Friday Agreement in a post-Brexit Northern Ireland?
So, I mean, obviously, like, who knows where we are with austerity and levelling up and all that. And I suppose, again, you know, I've said about 50 million times, but COVID is masking the tension in the Conservative Party, because I actually, you know, and I'm not necessarily playing it as a compliment, because I think he just does whatever he needs to do to be liked and get through the day. But I don't get the sense that Johnson is particularly attached to austerity, and at the moment, you know, that they have to be spending. But I suppose I would say two things. It has affected, you know, it has affected people's, you know, the argument, to the extent that political unionism ever made an argument, was, you know, you're economically better off in the UK. That has been totally upended, you know, while you're going, well, at the same time, you're driving the economy into a wall. So it doesn't really hold that much weight. And I suppose all of the arguments for, you know, not rushing United Ireland were, as I say, about stability as well. And you have also driven that argument into the wall by just creating fundamental instability. But I suppose it has the thing that people here are most attached to. And I say this all the time as somebody who likes Britain, enjoys Britain, has lots of friends and family, and lots of British institutions that I say, like the NHS and the BBC and music and culture, that I love, and they're really part of me and they're part of my identity. But unionism basically tries to sell me like flags and the military and the royals, and I'm like, I'm just not that interested. But the key thing here that probably will move more votes one way or the other on United Ireland is the NHS, right? So that's the fundamental thing that a lot of people will say, yeah, I mean, I'm interested in it, but I don't want to lose public health, and I don't want to have to pay to go to the GP. But the Tories are systematically undermining the NHS. So in that way, austerity changes the conversation. Now, I think we're going to enter, you know, a period of at least kind of ostentatious spending on certain things, and the internal market bill, in theory, gave the UK government power to spend on infrastructure all around the place. I think that is going to be a kind of a anti-Scots independence play. You know, it's going to be about, but look at all these lovely things, without requiring them to kind of consult with, you know, devolved administration. So it's hard to know, because I think ultimately the Tories are going to move out of that phase. We'll know more. I think the budget tomorrow is going to be a lot of interim measures, and clearly Sunak is still, you know, prioritise paying down the debt over all sorts of things. But really, whether it's, you know, fighting a rear guard in Scotland and Northern Ireland, or it's holding those new red wall seats, I don't think the Tories can afford to kind of make austerity the centre. But look, you know, I say this as somebody who just wants the best economic opportunities for people and stability, but there's more to life than money, you know, and it's a little bit, some of it is a little bit like, you know, some, you know, sure, look, don't buy you flowers on your birthday, you know, you just have to accept it. And people will go, yeah, you might build a mad bridge or a tunnel or propose it, but if you're disrespecting fundamentally people here and imposing solutions over their heads, you know, people will want to see a different way.
Okay.
Maybe just before we if we're coming to wrap up, sorry, Claire, I don't want to preempt you on that, but I just note that you said you'd come back to Article 16 and the EU's.
Oh yeah.
And I thought maybe it was worth just rehashing that a bit.
But the trauma, I will say, as somebody who has, as I say, followed this debate, I thought the world was ending on the 29th of it's like finding out your, you know, favorite uncle's a serial killer or something, you know, that basically the EU, who had been so attuned to, you know, the issues on our side and kind of the adult in the room for the last 4.5 years, made this fundamental mistake. And like we haven't heard exactly you know, what happened in terms of, I think my understanding of it is that basically, bear in mind, the team around Barnier have gone because they were, you know, the transition team and the negotiation team, they don't kind of exist anymore. So say like the person in your workplace who dealt with the sensitive issue goes, it leaves a big hole in your institutional knowledge. And I think basically at a bureaucratic level, somebody applied the rules and kind of worked it through. But anyway, for those few hours, it was terrible, because it upended it. And I think for those of us who had spent, you know, the first 4 weeks in January in the media fighting it out, saying, look, you know, this protocol, this is the way we have to do things, and kind of these are the rules, and people need certainty, it did upend it. Now it has been like almost fetishized and mythologized by Brexiters, and still you're hearing, you know, on the 29th, I mean, I heard Paisley on the radio, they stole vaccines from British Arms, and, you know, one, it didn't actually, they didn't do it. And as I said to people, you know, what lessons can we learn? Here's a lesson. If you're going to do something really stupid and everybody tells you it's really stupid, don't do it. And the EU learned that lesson. So they actually came back from the brink and resiled from something that was very damaging. And in some ways, you can say, actually, it shows that the system works. It shows that sovereignty exists in the EU, because Dublin got on the phone and went, what are you doing? And got it pulled back. So in a lot of ways, it's reassuring. But I suppose to those who wanted to imply that basically the protocol and all the rules around Brexit and the rules that you're experiencing yourself are just the EU being mean and trying to punish us for being independent and all that. Those who want to characterize the EU as bad faith actors, it was all their Christmases come at once, I suppose, and that's what I mean. It's going to be mythologized. You're going to hear about it from Brexiters, but you know, ultimately it didn't happen. The safety mechanisms worked, but it would have been really, really bad news. I mean, the reality is we get all our vaccines from the UK. Yay, the union. That's another thing that's delivering more than bridges. But so it actually, you know, vaccines weren't even if, and the route in it is, and like I'm not a lawyer, but you know, I think AstraZeneca have kind of pulled a bit of a file. I mean, they don't want to get sued or anything, but there was no question that vaccines were going to, you know, be exported, so to speak, from the Republic to Northern Ireland. That just wasn't something that was going to happen anyway, so it wasn't even anything that was necessary. But it was a really, really bad move. But you know, ultimately it didn't happen, and we are where we are now.
So I think we're coming towards an end. I'll just give you a chance, Claire. If there's anything else you see in the chat window that you feel like picking up on, then now is the time.
Well,
and I'll just ask one more myself. Is do you have any words of wisdom for us as campaigners here?
Not really. I mean,
Yeah.
Keep the faith. It's kind of, you know, somebody said something to me today on a totally unrelated issue. I had to do 2 interviews that I really didn't enjoy, and both times I went, I don't want to do that because it's a prickly issue. And you know that phrase, if you wrestle with a pig, you both get dirty, and you kind of, the pig's better at it or whatever, it beats you by experience. And somebody said to me, and this, by the way, isn't to do with unionism or nationalism or Brexit or anything, somebody said, but the pigs are winning, you know, every now and again we have to go in and have a fight with them. But so some of it is, you know, it's a really long, it is just to try and keep the faith. You are right, you're correct, you will be proven right. Unfortunately, I don't think as Remainers we're going to get a fundamental moment, because you know, it'll always be mined by grievance. Everything will be blamed on the EU, even though we are an independent nation and so on. And it is clear that COVID will mask some of the economic damage. So just look for the little wins. Progress is actually a series of small incremental changes. It isn't always, you know, a bang, but and look for the tangibles and the ways that you can demonstrate how it's been a problem and demonstrate a solution. I've no doubt that that's the direction that that Britain will go. I will say to you, you know, as a kind of, you know, an Irish person in Britain and who you know, intensely hanging around Parliament for years ago, whatever happens here, and you know, we spoke about the border poll and you know, constitutional change here. That is a fundamental question that it has now become. Would you like to rejoin the EU? But we're still with you and know the loss that you're experiencing. But just keep the faith. You know, we'll get them in the long grass and all that.
Okay. Okay, thank you very much. So I'd like to thank you very much for the time and the effort that you put into.
Thank you, I really enjoyed it.